Hey everyone, it's Veiled Shot back at it with an Awaken Chaos Air video, and as you saw from our intro, I had a request from JLim to build out some of the counterattack slash joint attack champions, and I just happen to have 4 copies of Jacob, so I went ahead and built out Jacob because obviously I can get some more potential out of him than some of the other characters out there. And so, I just want to say that I was a little underwhelmed with Jacob from my first initial testing, and then obviously I went in and tested him more thoroughly, and I don't think he's absolutely amazing. He does have some uses and some very solid uses, but I was, a little underwhelmed because I thought he would be a little better. Just to preface that, now he does have some really amazing uses, which we'll go on over later. And I will be jumping into his stats right here in a second, but if you do want to see a future champion featured in one of these in-depth guides, let me know in the comments below, and also let me know that you are enjoying these videos with a like, and subscribe to the channel to make sure you are keeping up to date, because I will be releasing a Desmond in-depth guide in the next coming days. I am really enjoying Desmond, and I will be showing you some more footage of Desmond in the future. So, first off is Jacob's stats. So we have A attack, which is a pretty decently high attack rating. I would have liked to see it at an S, because I don't think he actually has a ton of, raw stat multipliers in his, abilities, which we'll see in a second. So really it relies purely on just that, base stat, and because the multiplier is not high, and because the attack isn't like expert, it's just a little underwhelming on the damage. So, and then we have health and defense at a C rating is really squishy, but that doesn't really interfere with him too much, which we'll see from his passive in a second. And then we have B speed. It's actually at 85. I do happen to have triple ascension Jacob, which gives it that plus 15 speed for me. So he's going to be at 85. He's going to be much slower than this, which is pretty unfortunate, because you kind of want him to go before some of your other damage dealers, and I'll explain that in a second. And then we have crit rate at 8%. Of course, it could be higher, but 8% is not bad at all. So overall, the stats are okay. Like I said, really what we're looking at is the attack and crit rate and speed stats. The health and defense isn't too big of a deal. So first off, we have the passive, and this is why I say that the health and defense isn't too big of a deal. He just grants stealth at the start of battle. This is just at the start of battle. Every kind of wave that you're going through, he's going to get stealth. It can be removed when he's attacked. So if he gets AoE, he's going to be out in the open, and then he can get hit. Now, if you have the Ascension, which it is Ascension 5, so it's quite difficult to get to, you get permanent invisibility. And this is really solid. You basically can never target him unless it's an AoE or a counterattack. And so the health and defense matters significantly less, because he's never going to be able to be hit. So just keep that in mind. If you have the trait at Ascension 5, which isn't, obviously not everyone's going to have that, but if you happen to have it, it really does change the potential of Jacob. And then we're going to go over his trait, because I think this is kind of important to go over before we go into the basic and the ultimate. He randomly selects one ally at the start of every round. And every time that character uses a basic ability, Jacob will go ahead and use his basic on top of them. And the reason why I'm talking about this before is because this is one of the main reasons why people were curious about him, is because of this joint attack. He's going to get a ton of attacks, and then of course we have to go over the basic in a second. But that basic, it has to be doing some pretty major things in order for this to be useful. Because what ends up happening is, if you have a 20 or 30 or 40 round battle, which is when Jacob really starts to shine, then this special will start to swap between characters. So you really want it on someone with longer cooldowns, so that they're basicing more. For example, if you have it on Cyrus, or if you have it on Aurak, they're going to be using their ultimate and special abilities decently often. And then, someone like Connor has a 5-turn cooldown on his ultimate, so he might be basicing more often. So it really does matter who you get this on. And then we have the basic, which applies his unique debuff called Intrigue. So Intrigue doesn't require any focus. From what I've, through my testing, I have not seen it got resistance a single time. Maybe I'm just perhaps super lucky over tens of runs, but I have not seen it resisted a single time. And this Intrigue debuff will give the enemy minus 20 flat defense, and it stacks up to 20 times. So you have a max stack of minus 400 defense, but this is very rare to achieve. You're not going to get 20 stacks of this throughout most of your battles. You may get up to 10 to 12. That's a pretty common amount, is what I've experienced, but not 20. And then minus 400 defense even if you have the max 40 or 20 stacks, it's actually not that much of a damage increase. It's a little bit less than the actual defense down 1 ability. Now, this does stack with defense down, so that is really solid, but it's not as impressive as you might think it is. On top of all that, it's going to be dealing 80% damage with the basic, and it's going to grant himself 1 rage, and he has a max of 6 rage. So what does rage do? Well, we're going to go ahead and look at the ultimate. He expends all rage to enter a state of madness. He gets a bonus turn for every 1 rage, so essentially 6 extra bonus turns as the potential, and he exit madness state after all bonus turns are used up. So what is madness? Well, madness changes the abilities he can use. He can only use the basic, and the basic gives him stacks of madness. So it doesn't actually show here, which is a little unfortunate, but madness actually gives him a small attack increase, which we will see when we go ahead and test him out in campaign in a second. He gives us a flat attack increase, stacking, I think, up to 30 times is what I've seen. We will go ahead and see that in just a second. And that basically just replaces all of his abilities, and he's just going to go ahead and max stack his attack. So it actually doesn't apply intrigue either. So you don't get to apply intrigue, you get madness. So this is what's interesting. In order for Jacob to be really, really, really useful, is you need to both stack up his attack from his ultimate and his defense down on his passive, but on his passive basic, but you don't get to do both at the same time, which is a little really unfortunate. If you could do both at the same time, I think this would amplify Jacob's power quite a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and head into campaign and give you all the ratings as I normally do. This is based on my tier list, which I have a video that I did previously, and I will be updating it for the new patch. So we're going to go ahead and head into campaign and check him out there. Just before we head into campaign, I just want to real quickly go over his build. So is there any sets that are particularly useful on him? I would mention the curse set. It did get a nerf, but it's still decent, really solid on him, honestly. And that's because one of the main reasons that Jacob is good is because he has that stacking defense down, also the stacking attack that he puts on himself. So giving those extra basics, which is the only damaging skill he actually has, is nice. But if you don't have that, just basic damage dealing build here with high crit rate, high crit damage, decent speed, really low health and defense. He's really squishy, and 3400 attack. Now it's important to note, typically the crit damage stat is actually more important for Jacob, and the reason for that is he's going to be stacking his own attack. So obviously there's diminishing returns giving himself attack. However, the crit damage will scale off of not only his base attack, but his also stacking attack that he's going to give himself. So crit damage is a real nice stat for Jacob. Unfortunately, I don't have the correct gear to get him in that, but this should be, any stats on Jacob should be achievable for most of you out there. So we're going to go ahead and head into campaign and just kind of show you exactly how the kit works and what I went over previously. So we're heading into campaign here, and I'm just going to go ahead and use some of his skills. But first off, I want to mention, right when we basic, he's going to go ahead and apply that intrigue. We actually got deflected there, and it still applied intrigue. When you get deflected in this game, it actually doesn't affect your debuffs landing. There's no focus. It didn't get resist or anything. So there's the basic, and it applies the defense down. Now I have, Jacob rated as a 5 for campaign, and the reason for this is he just takes too long to stack up to actually get big use out of him, and on top of that, he doesn't actually AoE at all, so he doesn't actually provide too much for campaign itself. And as you saw there, Mythasia basic, and Jacob was called for an additional attack. And so I'm just going to go ahead and show you exactly what his ultimate does here, and we're just going to continuously apply those intrigues with the basic. As you saw, he actually took damage there, so his stealth kind of disappeared there. And then I'm going to go ahead and use the ultimate here just to show you. We have 4 rage, so we're going to go ahead and pop the ultimate. We're going to get our new abilities, and we got 4 bonus turns there. So it's important to note that you still keep your turn, but you get the bonus turns. And then, boom, now we have madness stack. So you can see madness. We cannot see the madness on Jacob itself, but you can see here, max 20 stacks plus 50 attack per. So I believe I said max 30 stacks, but it's actually max 20 stacks. So this in total gives you a total of 1,000 attack, which is actually quite significant. You're able to get that much attack on him from stacking. And you can see here, we're still at 6 rage. That's the maximum we can get. So we keep our turn and then get 4 bonus turns. And you can just see here, we just keep basicking, basic, and we just keep stacking up that madness, keep stacking it up. And this is where Jacob starts to really shine, is when you get a lot of stacks of that. However, obviously the AI does not use it as well as you will, so just keep that in mind. But This is him in campaign. He's not amazing, but I just wanted to go ahead and show you that. And let's go ahead and head into what I rate for him in arena. So I'm not even going to bother using Jacob in arena. I do not think he's good for arena at all. And I have him rated as a 3 for arena defense and a 4 for arena offense. You can use him, but it's not good, especially for arena defense. But arena offense, you just don't have enough time to stack up his abilities. If you're curious about any of these ratings, I do have a video on the tier list that I made a couple of days ago, and all these ratings are coming from there. So let's go ahead and head on to Void Tower and show the rating in there. So here we are in Void Tower, and I'm heading into a battle just to kind of show you his potential in Void Tower. Now, I have him rated as a 6, and I just think he gets outclassed by a lot of characters out there. Now, Void Tower does, tend to be on the longer side of battles. The only thing is he actually just doesn't provide enough damage. I mean, look at that hit. It did like 1,200 damage on a character. Like, that's not enough damage to actually get a lot of use out of it. Now, yes, he will be scaling, but I'd much rather have just someone else in his place instead of having Jacob. And obviously you will be doing Void Tower on manual most likely, so you can actually use his passive much more efficiently. Now that is something to consider. And I could see him maybe placed as a 7, but I just don't think he provides enough damage to actually use him in Void Tower. And so you can see here, it's just no damage is coming out of him. We did 2k on a basic on the correct affinity, so that's a 50% damage increase. So that's just not too great. So I have him rate him as a 6. It is a longer battle, but I would not recommend using him in Void Tower typically. Let's go ahead and move on to the guild boss. So currently we're on a water guild boss, which I would highly recommend against using him in there. But I do think for guild boss, he actually starts to become a little better because there's only a single target. So all he does is single targets, and also the battles tend to be longer. However, if you're doing it on auto, he's much worse. But if you're doing it on manual, which a lot of people do, then I would put him at about a 7 for the fire and an 8 for the wood. I think he actually gets really solid in both of those. I would put him at a 4 for the water. You should not use him on opposite affinity. He's going to die really easily. It's also important to note that even on the standard affinity with fire, he's going to die easily because the guild boss AoEs every 2 rounds. So it's going to hit Jacob really hard, and it's going to be hard to keep him alive, even though he's going to be invisible if you happen to have that. But he does stack up quite nicely, and he does apply the defense down, which is nice for the guild boss. So, if you're going to use him in a couple different places, it's going to be, one of them is going to be in guild boss, specifically on the wood. He's really solid for. Let's go ahead and move on to Endless Trials. So in Endless Trials, I have him rated as a 5, and I'm not even going to bother. I have a couple pieces of footage for him, but I just don't think you should use him in Endless Trials at all. The battles are way too quick. They are 1 round or 1 stage battles with 4 characters. You're just not going to get enough time to stack up your passives, your 2 versions of the passive on Jacob, in order for you to actually get a lot of use out of him. So I would not recommend using him in Endless Trials at all. So let's go ahead and move on to the dungeons. So here we are at the dungeons, and this is where Jacob really starts to become a consideration for a lot of you, specifically in Tulpa. My personal opinion was that, he's a Tulpa character, and I would not use him in anywhere else. So I have him rated him as an 8 for Tulpa. So for being someone who, really only considers to be good for Tulpa, I would not, recommend that you necessarily build him if that's the only place he's, I consider him really good at, and he's reaching an 8. So, just take that into consideration. I will be running in a Tulpa match here just in a second, but for Ashe, I have him rated as a 5, and for Queen, I have him rated as a 2. You do not want to use him in Queen. He's way too squishy. He will just die every time. The Queen just AoEs all the time. He's just going to die every time. Wrong affinity. Don't use him in Queen. Absolute terrible character for Queen. For Ashe, there's so many imps, you don't really want single target damage typically. And if you are going to take in single target damage, you want it to be a lot of boss dealing damage. You don't want to have it sit there and scale, because the longer you're in a battle, the longer you are taking to mess up. Like, you could happen to have the poor RNG rolls and the boss just kills you outright. So you want to make them shorter if you can. And Jacob really doesn't help you with that. He doesn't necessarily do a lot of damage or amplify your other damage dealers either. But I will show you in Tulpa here. And I'm actually not going to be able to run 12 here. I'm going to be running 11 just to show you. And this is going to be Jacob, Cyrus, Connor, and Orak. So a pretty standard comp here. And I should be able to beat this. I've tested it a couple times, but I don't know if it's 100% win rate. And if you haven't checked out my previous videos on my free-to-play account progressions, I was able to complete 11 with Asrina instead of Jacob in the slot every time, pretty much. And just so you know, we're attacking the first elite on the right and then the boss, because typically the ultimates will stack up so that the shield pops, and then we'll have the Aurak ultimate. But again, this is where Jacob is supposed to be, like, exactly where you want him. And he just doesn't do enough, in my opinion, for you to justify the investment into him. I think you can get the same amount of, results with someone like Asrina, and I think just Asrina does more than him in Tulpa, personally, is what I've seen. So, is he worth building? Well, it's a kind of a tough question to answer, specifically in the Tulpas field, because do you want to build Asrina or do you want to build Jacob? I don't think Asrina is particularly good in a lot of other game modes, so I think it really depends on whether or not you should, or whether or not you got a lot of copies of Jacob or you got a lot of copies of Asrina, in my opinion. I think both of them are, equally as solid in Tulpa. I just don't think that, Jacob or Asrina really shine in a lot of other game modes. So just keep that in mind. Now, keep in mind also that Asrina is a free character. You get her from the Covenants, whereas Jacob is pure summon, so it's also much easier to get Asrina too. So Asrina does have that going for her. But you can see here he's not applying the defense down because he's in Madness. I really wish they would have kept the fact that his passive applies the defense down while in Madness. It would have drastically increased his usefulness in something like Tulpa, especially for these long battles. But you can just see here that we're getting through the golems. We're getting through them just fine, but we would have also gotten through them just fine with Asrina. So, take with that what you will, because I don't think Jacob is a must build at all. Is he worth building? Sure, but not a must build. Absolutely not. And I'm just going to let this run for a little bit just to give you some ideas, and I will be back when we are done with this. So I pop back because I just want to, just highlight the Jacob. This is his maximum potential essentially right here in something like Tulpa, where he's getting 4 or 5 extra turns, and he, deals about 10% to the Tulpa with 4 or 5 extra turns. You can easily get that with a Cyrus basic and then a curse proc. So, just to compare a couple of the characters, look at that. Cyrus just did 4%. Plus a basic and another 4%, so that's just a double basic, whereas Jacob had to stack all of that. So I did skip ahead because we did end up losing. Now, I do think we could have possibly won, but you can just see here, yes, I don't have the best gear on him. Yes, Cyrus specifically is perfect for Tulpa, but Aurak and Jacob's gear is very comparable for what I have on them right now. Aurak does have the AoE, but you could just see the damage difference between Jacob and Aurak. It is insane, and it is just not even comparable, to be honest. Aurak's main damage comes from his ultimate, and that just does an insane amount of damage to the boss. And again, as I said, he doesn't have an AoE, but you would like to see a little bit more damage from Jacob. If you compare Jacob damage number to Asrina, which I don't have built because Asrina's gear is on Jacob, it's just not the same. You can go ahead and check out my previous videos on Asrina if you want to compare them, but as you can see, a little underwhelming, and that's why I think he's not necessarily a must build. So let's go ahead and head over to the ability crystal dungeons. So here we are in No Man's Land, and I think this is the one spot where Jacob truly does shine with his bonus turns, and that is Bane Wraith. He's going to get all those join attacks and bonus turns and really take down that shield. So I have him as an absolute 10 for the Bane Wraith, but as a 7 for everything else and a 4 for the Flood, because he does have trouble surviving in the Flood, and also he's on the wrong affinities there. So now I'm excited to use him in Bane Wraith because I need to farm a ton of Bane Wraith, and it's really long if you don't have the right characters, so that is a little exciting. So let's go ahead and go over his potion value and then go over the overall thoughts on Jacob. So I have Jacob's potion value at a 7. And the reason I have him as a 7 is because I actually think that the trait is really, really good. You know, it really does change. Like if you had to happen to have this trait on someone like Nathalia, for example, making sure that she's basically never attacked except for AoEs is huge on damage dealers. It's actually a huge increase to their survivability. On top of that, you're getting a ton of extra stats. Now, obviously, anyone that can reach Ascension 5 does get a ton of stats as well. But also, the Ascension 5 does affect the rating here. Because I would have him as an 8 or a 9 if it wasn't Ascension 5. Because it's Ascension 5, I dropped it a little bit, but I think that this trait is actually such a good trait, specifically for damage dealers in general. And it's definitely worth getting if you are using Jacob. Now, is Jacob worth the character? Well, I will go over that in just a second. So overall, I have Jacob rated as a 5.76 or a 5.68. And the reason I have two different ratings there is because there are some people who asked me to rate him without the potion value included. And so I have done so. Now, is Jacob actually worth it? So there's two things to consider. And I know someone's going to mention this in the comments if they have not watched the whole video, but Jacob's damage can't just be looked at in isolation. And what I mean by that is Jacob, because of his passive, creating that defense down, actually amplifies the other characters on your team. Because he's getting that defense down, which means that your other characters are doing more damage. However, the increase in damage that your other characters are doing is actually not a lot at all. And on top of that, you have to consider on what team you're using him in. You're using him in a Tulpa team 90% of the time. And if you're using him in a Tulpa team, you're going to be using an Aurak because you're using him in a standard Tulpa comp with probably without poisons if you're using Jacob. And that means that Aurak is going to be in there. He's doing true damage. So he's actually, a majority of Aurak's damage is not getting increased. And so the only one that's really getting increased is Cyrus. And so the damage that he's actually increasing on your other characters is not that much at all. So is he worth building? For Tulpa, I would say yes. If you're going for a standard Tulpa comp, I would recommend building him. If you happen to pull, you know, a couple copies of him, if you happen to pull more copies of Asrina, I would prefer to stick over Asrina. And so just keep that in mind. And I do think that he's a decent character in specifically scaling single target damage matches. But other than that, I would not recommend building him. So if you are interested in seeing more of these, you know, in-depth guides, be sure to leave in the comments what character you want to see next. I plan on doing Desmond in the future, and if you like that, be sure to drop this video a like and subscribe so that you know that the Desmond guide is coming, and I will see you for the next one.